What's up? My name is James Blissett. I'm a professional gambler and founder of Lucrative MMA, which is my handicapping service where I help people make money from betting on MMA. Now today I want to speak to you about a very important MMA betting concept. This is a specific mistake that bookmakers regularly make in the MMA markets. This is something that I have personally been using for literally half a decade to make money. And it is an angle that still to this day has not been fixed by the bookmakers and that I believe never will be. The angle I'm talking about is what I like to call line overreactions. Now I'm sure this happens in every sport, but I'm gonna speak specifically about MMA because that's where I've used that angle to make myself money personally. A line overreaction is where the bookmakers overreact to a fighter's last fight and change the market according to that overreaction. If you spot these overreactions, it can be hugely profitable. You're usually betting on historic form versus recent form, which is usually more reliable. Let me give you an example of this bookmaker overreaction. In February of 2021, UFC fighter Darrick Minner took on Charles Rosa on one of the UFC's Fight Night cards. Now going into that fight, Darrick Minner had a record of 24-11, and a vast majority of those fights ended inside the distance. It was quite a surprise to most people when his fight against Charles Rosa in February ended up going to decision. Darrick Minner hardly sees decisions. The guy's had 40 fights so far, and only 5 have gone to a decision. So that fight against Charles Rosa, it was an outlier. There was a few times where it almost ended inside the distance, but Charles Rosa didn't want to tap, and so the fight did end up going the full 15 minutes and it went to decision. Now where the bookmakers overreacted was not in that fight, but it was in Darrick Minner's next fight. Because of the Charles Rosa decision fight, they overreacted. They priced the prop bets of the fight goes to decision and the over 2.5 rounds at plus money in Darrick Minner's next fight against Darren Elkins. Now remember, I just told you Darrick Minner has 40 fights overall and only 5 have gone to a decision. It's clear to see that the guy is a kill or be killed fighter. Now instead of looking at Darrick Minner's historic form, the bookmakers only took into account his recent form in a decision win against Charles Rosa. That was the reason they placed the prop bets of the over 2.5 rounds and the fight goes to decision against his fight with Darren Elkins at plus money. Now you look on the Darren Elkins side. The guy isn't a kill or be killed fighter like Darrick Minner, but the guy still gets killed or kills a lot of times in his MMA career. I mean, we look at his record, 50% of his wins and losses have come inside the distance. So it's not like this guy just goes to a decision all the time. So on the one hand, you got Darrick Minner who ends inside the distance almost all the time. On the other hand, you got someone like Darren Elkins who ends inside the distance 50% of the time. And on top of that, they're both going to come forward. They're both going to push the pace. I mean, mathematically and stylistically, this fight was going to end inside the distance. But simply because of Darrick Minner's last fight, the bookies overreacted to that and favored the fight to go to decision. The bookmakers overreacted to this one fight and completely forgot about the historics of how Darrick Minner's fights usually go. So no surprise what actually happened in the fight. It was a back and forth fight. Darrick Minner gassed out like he does in 90% of his fights. Darren Elkins poured it on him round 2, took him down, ground and pounded him, hurt him a few times, and eventually got the stoppage late in round 2. It was fairly clear to me that this fight wasn't going to go to decision. I didn't care about Darrick Minner's last fight against Charles Rosa because I understood that that was an outlier. The bookmakers didn't look into this enough and they didn't take into account that that fight was an outlier. This happens almost every single week in the UFC and the MMA markets in general. There's so many things the bookies overreact to. It's not just over and under props. Sometimes fighters are massive favorites just because they got a good win in their last fight. Sometimes fighters are massive underdogs because they massively underperformed in their last fight. Another example I can think of, Dan Hooker was a minus 140 or minus 150 favorite against Claudio Puelles. If we look at that matchup, skill for skill, Dan Hooker should have been a minus 400 favorite, yet he was only a minus 150 favorite. Now why is that? It was because of a bookmaker overreaction. Dan Hooker had been on a downslide in his last few fights. He had been fighting the best, highest level of competition that you can fight in the sport. So although he had been losing, he was taking a massive step down when he fought Claudio Puelles. The bookmakers didn't really take that into account, and so they decided to put his odds at a very generous minus 150. I laid a big bet on his money line and I won a lot of money. And the reason is because I spotted this bookmaker overreaction. A good tip I'm going to give you now is when you're next betting on MMA, try and look to see where recent form is baked into the line more than historic form. This is when you can get a massive edge on the MMA markets. This is where you can make real money. This is the #1 difference between what professional gamblers look for and what recreational gamblers look for. Recreational gamblers look for the easy wins. This fighter's much better than the other fighter. I'm gonna bet on that fighter. Professional gamblers look at the market and go, this line is wide. It shouldn't be this wide. This is an overreaction. This is an edge I'm going to exploit. Make sure you look out for these things. You have to capitalize when the bookmakers make mistakes. That's the only way you're going to make money long term in the game. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.